One. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great conversation sponsored by the Jason Howell Company. My name is Jason Howell, and today's conversation is around philanthropy. In fact, philanthropy as a service. So, what is philanthropy? Charity? How do you become a philanthropist? We'll answer questions like this and hopefully a few more with our great guest today, Mr. Marshall Ginn. Marshall, how are you? What's your day been like, and what's your day looking like today?
I am doing pretty good. It's Friday of a busy week, and I'm excited to be talking about my very favorite topic, which is philanthropy. In fact, philanthropy is my favorite cause. There are a lot of great things out there in the world that are going on, but frankly, philanthropy is my favorite cause, and so I'm always happy to be talking about it. And that's my main focus for today's work. Other than that, I'm reviewing proposals for a foundation. So I'm steeped in philanthropy today. So,
Talking about it, reviewing proposals,
yep.
hopefully not working all the way to the daylight hours are over since we are in the summer and we go till 8:30 now. So hopefully you
Yeah,
get that
exactly.
soon.
Exactly.
Oh, well, super. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up something that we're sharing today, our
Mhm.
slide deck, our very short slide deck, so people can get a beautiful image of you that you shared with me, and just let folks know that we are talking about philanthropy in some ways as a service, since that's kind of what you provide with Capital Philanthropy right out here in Washington, D.C. Thank you for being here and being able to share some of your great your content today. I do
Sure.
appreciate it. Before we get to the Q&A that we have for you, we'll just have a word from our sponsor, which is, of course, the Jason Howell Company. So, Jason Howell Company is a family wealth management firm. We specialize in proactive philanthropy as well as sustainable investing and family governance. And we do this by working with experts just like Marshall. We form something of a virtual family office. And so families have one place to go talk through all the different categories of their wealth strategies. Based out here just in Northern Virginia, outside of Washington, D.C., but we serve clients all around the country. For more about Jason Howell Company, just go to jasonhowell.com. And with that, we've got Marshall's extensive bio that I'm so happy for people to see. I won't read it all. People will have the opportunity to pause this video and take a look-see through a lot of it. But I just wanted to pop through a couple of things here, Marshall, and talk about what will highlight some of your experience. The idea that you had this firm, Capital Development Strategies, which is distinct from what you've done with Capital Philanthropy. Tell us a little bit about that.
So my original roots in the nonprofit sector were in fundraising. So back in the late 1980s, I'll date myself. I got my started in fundraising, and starting in 2000 actually, I started Capital Development Strategies, and it was an independent consulting practice, and the focus was mainly on fundraising, capital campaigns, establishing major gifts programs, and things like that. And I did some management consulting over the years as I began to kind of develop an expertise in that. And so Capital Development Strategies was around till about 2018 when I took a break from consulting and worked for Virginia Hospital Center here in Arlington, Virginia, which is where I'm also located. And then after I left the hospital is when I started Capital Philanthropy, realizing, as I said earlier, that philanthropy is actually my favorite cause, and I really wanted that to be the focus of my consulting practice.
So yeah, you've got it from the sort of the corporate side, the grantor side, or
Hmm.
grantee side, and then the people who might be applying for it. You've got both sides of it.
I do. I was even a grant writer for many years when I was much younger, so I really have seen all of the parts of the grant making, grant seeking process from one end to the other.
Oh, that's helpful for
It
people that are
is.
looking
It's a
for.
lots of different perspectives to kind of bring into this. So.
Yeah, for certain. And speaking of perspectives, we're here virtually, but you've done a lot of presentations in your time and have had all of these in-person experiences. Talk about how doing live presentations has made you better at essentially doing your job in philanthropy for people that are both looking for philanthropy as far as receiving it and those who want to donate.
Well, I'd certainly, as a consultant, when I do in-person presentations, especially when I'm, physically in the room, it is actually, frankly, a really good opportunity for someone to see what it's like to interact with me on a longer term basis rather than simply looking at me very briefly or reading something I wrote. is people can actually see what it's like to work with me and interact with me and how I kind of, move around the space and things like that. I'm learning how to do this more in Zoom because, as you might imagine, with the pandemic, we all had to use Zoom to develop relationships. And all of us, frankly, even in philanthropy, I know so many nonprofits that are now effectively using Zoom to maintain and build relationships with their donors. And certainly as a consultant and advisor, I work with organizations all over this on the entire Eastern Seaboard now, actually. So Zoom has enabled me to essentially be present to people, even though we are separated by a physical distance. So
Very
I'm learning how
similar.
to do it though. Still like being around in the same room with people. It's still my favorite, but I'm learning how to enjoy the Zoom world as well.
And I imagine that's something that you talk to, your full, your donors and other folks who are looking to essentially either give money or receive money, being in the room, being in person, that's still got to make a difference even these days.
It does. I mean, when it all comes down to it, I am a coach of types, and so you really, a lot of what happens is sort of around the proverbial table. So it's about conversations, it's about questions and answers, and that does lend itself to, better when you're in a room. But I think again, I think everyone has become accustomed to that interaction. So I do think that people, even clients are realizing that no, we can have meaningful relationships with our advisors, even though we're, on a computer monitor. So we're all kind of getting used to it. So our expectations, I think, are syncing up as we move through through the years with this techniques.
Excellent. Well, I want to get a little into your sort of other career, quote unquote, but tell us first what this 2164 certified advisor is.
Absolutely. Well, 2164 was established. I want to say it was a family foundation actually started it, and it became its own consulting practice a number of years ago. 2164, which derives its name from 21 years old, which is when people really kind of assume adulthood and begin to, take over comparts maybe of a family business. And 64 is that age where people really begin to look hard at their retirement or their future or their legacy. So that's actually where the 2164 came from.
Ah, I see.
It is a 2-day training that I went through. I actually did it in Washington, D.C. with people who were trained in this with about 20 some other professionals from all over the country, from community foundations, from other grant makers, and other advisors who all learn this particular technique in working with multi-generational families to help them to explore what's important to them. And there are lots of different techniques, and it's a great research-based program. We've got lots of tools, but essentially it became something that I became, officially a certified person, and then I also, promised to be a good ethical advisor, and I promised that every year, and I recertify it. And we also do learning and have, connections with each other, so that we can continue to, hone our practices as well. So that's the basics of what 2164
Yeah.
is.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
About how many of those are there? How many
Oh
certified?
gosh, there are lots. I mean, there are like there are hundreds of philanthropy advisors that are trained in the 2164 approach
Okay.
all over the country. I think they've even got like a database of everyone who's certified. And there are a lot of them here in the Washington D.C. area. I have a number of them are my colleagues. I'm a member of the National Network of Consultants to Grant Makers, and there are a number of my fellow NNCG members who are also trained in 2164. And in fact, NNCG and 2164 did a joint survey of philanthropic practice and philanthropic advisory services nationwide. We did that last year and are rolling out that data even now. So we've been collaborating with 2164 as a network as well. So.
Fascinating. Well, all right. Now tell us a little bit about your interest in the arts, and you can reference some of that art behind you.
Yes, well, my very first job in fundraising, as I mentioned, was actually at a music school in Washington, D.C. And so arts funding became sort of one of my very first exposures to the field. I am, when I'm not being a consultant, I am an artist. I'm an oil painter, and yes, those paintings behind me are mine. I have, painting is wonderful. Painting does not pay the rent. Painting does pay for itself, and it helps me to go up to Maine in the summertime, which is where I get a lot of my inspiration, as well as from the Shenandoah National Park. And I enjoy it. And the Arlington Artists Alliance, of which I'm a member, is a great group that we support each other, and we have, exhibits and shows here at Arlington County, and I have really enjoyed being part of that. And people have been super kind and responsive and have bought my art, and which I'm delighted. And I've got some commissions that I'm even working on even now. So it's been a lot of fun. So, but thank you for asking. It's a fun. It's more than a hobby. That's almost a second job, but it's definitely a great passion of mine.
Well, your contact information is right here for anyone that'd
Yep,
like to reach out to you
absolutely.
soon because of your capital philanthropy services, or
Yep.
perhaps even the art
And there's a link on the bottom of the Capital Philanthropy homepage, way down at the bottom that says Marshall's an artist. Also, click here to go to my gallery site. So when
Oh,
in doubt, I'm
perfect.
cross promoting myself,
Excellent.
as a
Excellent.
professional. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, here are the questions that we have for you and for everyone that's watching. You can see these lists of questions. I'm going to go to the first question, and then I'm going to toggle back so you can actually see Marshall answer them.
Sure.
Something I've learned to do just to make it more interesting. Let's see the whole facial expression at the very least, even here in the virtual Zoom. So, Marshall, how do you explain what you do, which is philanthropic consulting?
Mhm. Well, philanthropic consulting or philanthropic advising, as I also refer to it, is really about guiding individual donors or families or family foundations or any other grant makers as they make thoughtful decisions about financial contribution in ways that support, at least we hope that will support the issues and topics that are important to them. Advisory support is not about telling clients what to do. It's really, as a consultant, it's my job to advise, to coach, to encourage creative thinking, to ask thought-provoking questions, and to share occasionally my perspective and occasionally give my opinion on something if needed. But it's really about facilitating that journey on the donor's behalf of what's important to them and helping them to cross that threshold of saying, I think I want to support the community to how on earth do I start developing relationships with nonprofits? So that's essentially what being an advisor is.
That's so helpful because from my vantage point, many times the best we can do, which is actually quite good, is link up with a community foundation who
Hmm.
might have
Hmm.
access to a swath of nonprofits within the local area and beyond,
Hmm.
and be able to give us some of that advice. And so you say we can probably partner with those organizations and with people like you, or I shouldn't say people like you. How many of you are there? There's only one of you. So someone like yourself as another option for people.
Absolutely. Definitely. I'm a big one for collaborating. So
Oh, that's
absolutely.
excellent. Now, tell us a little bit about the techniques that you use to help families identify the values that are interested or that they're interested in, of course, but where they can also find that with a nonprofit organization that they can donate to.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's an important part of this whole thing is it really is about alignment with the values. It really primarily starts with a lot of questions on my part. Some of the questions that I might ask, whether it's a family or individual or multi-generations is, what issues are important to you and your family? Is there something you're particularly passionate about? That could be anything from a specific disease, maybe a grandparent passed away from cancer, and so they're really focused on that, or they want to help entrepreneurs because they are business themselves, or they really are focused on housing or homelessness. Everyone's got particular issues, but I sort of ask the questions and pull out from them what is their particular interest. I also ask them about philanthropy and their own philanthropic practice. Some is, when they've made gifts in the past to anything, whatever that was, what was that like for them? How did it make them feel? Does that provide a model for if they want to do things like that in the future, they want to, capture that same good feeling? It is important, I think, to ask when people think about philanthropy, there are a lot of sort of angles to this. I ask families and individuals, are they interested in more hands-on direct service, or do they want to focus on perhaps maybe big picture issues or policies or system-wide changes? All of those actually can benefit from philanthropic support. And so one is not better than the other. They both rely on each other, but depends on, again, what the interests are of the family. And then lastly, I do, want to find out if it is a family, is, for example, do they want their children or other family members involved? in the process? Do they, or a couple, do they want to model the kind of community support behavior that they hope perhaps their children will follow them, having seen this model and will do it themselves when they grow up? So again, that may point them in a particular direction into the type of philanthropy or the type of nonprofit. There are more formal ways of exploring values alignment, and we've already talked about it, is that the 2164 approach, it is an engagement program based on what is known as the action research model. So that's sort of the core structure of it. But it's very client centered, it's highly interactive and very action oriented when I do this process with families. And the clients are really directly engaged in defining those challenges and plan solutions to, kind of figure out where they're going. And at the center of this model, I think is a great way to kind of summarize it. And whether I'm using 2164 or not, is the equation is what am I inheriting plus who am I equals what am I going to do about it? And that's really kind of that's it right there, is when we talk about philanthropy and philanthropy advising and values alignment, is really that what am I inheriting? And it could be, that's not just money. It could mean what am I inheriting from a relationship or my place in the community, the ties I've got. So it could be whatever it is that I'm inheriting, and then who am I? And there are a lot of tools and tricks, using 2164 to talk through that. But again, frankly, just asking those basic questions is a great way to start that
Wow.
journey, that discernment.
So much in there. I mean,
Yeah.
number one, it's so helpful when people think I'm a philanthropist. I don't know what that means, what that is. And you come
Yep.
right straight at them and say, what are you interested in? I
Yep.
wrote that down. And
Yep.
then what type are you interested in? Because there is the nonprofit world, 501(c)(3)s, but then,
Hmm.
it could be political, in which case it may not be, donatable or may not be deductible.
Yep.
But if
Indeed.
you're interested in that range, you could decide to do that. And then, do you want your kids or children involved within it as well? Which is such an important question, because for some people with enough wealth, if they want their kids involved, then they may want their kids involved after they're no longer here.
Mhm.
So starting to walk through those.
And different families will take different positions of that. Again, I'm not to say one's right or wrong. There definitely are families where they say, we've made our wealth, and maybe we tell the children a little bit, but we want them to make their own way and make their own choices and build their own wealth. And so they kind of keep them separate, not because they're trying to exclude, but maybe because they're, building sort of, an independence of the kids. Others, it's just become part of the family business, and I know friends who are in the sixth or seventh generation of a family foundation. It's part of the family business. So again, not one right or wrong way, just as long as it's being done thoughtfully. But I do think helping young people and providing young people with models. I mean, I certainly know what I was modeled. My parents were both extremely active volunteers and were president of, junior leagues and JCs and Kiwanis clubs and things like that. So I grew up in a family where giving your time was what you did, because I saw it from my parents. And I do think that's important in any family for young people to see, oh yeah, I can support the community in lots of different ways. I can volunteer, I can give. So I think that's an important message to give.
No, that's a great point and a wonderful transition to the next question that we had for you, which is how do you educate donor
Mhm.
families on how to build productive relationships with the nonprofits that they do support? Volunteering is one way, perhaps. What else do you do?
And it really is about relationships. I mean, I think, I when I used to do fundraising training, I said that it's all about the relationships. And it really, frankly, if the relationships are positive, the money just happens to be an accidental byproduct. I mean, I think if a nonprofit and the donors are doing the right thing, all kinds of amazing stuff does happen. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been on both sides of this. So I have worked as a grant writer and I've been a fundraiser. I have consulted with nonprofits who are going after funders, but I've also been a grant maker. I've made decisions about grants and I've reviewed applications. So I've seen a little bit of, both sides of this. And again, it really relies on a lot of asking some thought-provoking questions about, for example, when they've made any gifts in the past, for example, and again, whatever it was, when were they treated really well, or when did they feel particularly good about that experience of giving? And then we can sort of stop there and pick that apart. What was going on? What happened to make it such a positive experience? Was it that you were thanked a whole lot? Was it that you were invited to something? Was it that your name was on something? Or was it that you got a thank you note from one of the kids who benefited from the service? Or, what were the things that made it a positive experience? And that gives you a model and a structure to go if you're talking to another nonprofit to say, hey, tell me how you support your donors or how you engage with your donors. That's really then on the nonprofit to say, well, this is how we do it. And then you could decide, oh, yeah, that's the kind of relationship I want to get.
Yeah, it'd be a good fit.
Also, go ahead. Just go ahead.
I was just thinking that it would be a good fit.
Yes, and that it would be a good
Yeah.
fit. I mean, because again, not everyone approaches things the same way. Um, I do think that it is on. I've actually have talked to this about like formal like grant makers foundations, for example, the kind of questions that they ask in their applications or in their decision making process. So, for example, if relationship building is really important for them, I want to make sure that they're asking questions about that in their grant process. If they are really very private and don't really like the idea of being, told everyone here we're supporting this organization, they're much more private. And the nonprofit that they are giving to is really big into radical, transparent communication and wants to tell everyone that might not be a good fit. But if the donor or the funder didn't ask about that, and then they discover that a little bit down the way that this relationship really isn't working right, I think that's as much on the donor as it is on the nonprofit. I mean, I think that as donors, you should ask those kind of questions of what is important to you, what kind of relationships are important to you, and then ask about that when you're talking to them, whether it's just in a conversation or it's a grant application, whatever format. And there are groups that, for example, you might be a lot of the, I will say, younger generation, or whether we call it, whichever generation, but definitely people who are now much younger than I am. But they approach philanthropy, they approach engagement in a very different way. They want to be more hands-on. They want to be involved. They are looking for opportunities where they can have, authentic experiences. They can roll up their sleeves and things like that. And again, and maybe you want to have opportunities like that for your children to be involved. Those are the kind of questions that you can ask and explore with a nonprofit if that's going to be a good fit.
That's
Also,
helpful. Oh,
and I also can coach a family in some of the other kinds of questions because there's so much to learn and know about a nonprofit, and different things make a different impact to people. Some people are very focused on finances. Well, do you know how to read a nonprofit's financial statement? If they handed you a 990, they look different than a business, profit and loss statement. What
tax
are that?
return. Yeah.
What exactly? What are the management practices of a nonprofit? Do they align with the way you approach stuff? Or you want to maybe learn about their leadership. Who is their chief executive? Who is their board chair? Do you like them? Again, especially since we're talking about families who are likely to be making fairly, reasonable sized contributions. You want to meet the CEO. You want to find out if this is someone that you can be a good partner with. So again, it's again a lot about asking questions and exploring that relationship, just like any other relationship you want to get into.
Marshall, could you, for maybe just 20 seconds,
Sure.
speak to the structure of the meetings you would have with a family as you go through, all these different questions? My guess is that there are a set of questions you have in an initial meeting, a set of questions in a subsequent meeting, and a set of questions before a decision is made. Can you talk about just quickly
Sure,
that process?
and you've really described it well. I mean, there's kind of an initial, coaching and getting to know each other and about the ideas that they have, and again, asking some of those initial questions. What's important to you? What type of, there's also the, what type of vehicle might you be using? Again, they're hopefully coming to me from a wealth advisor and estate attorney, so we might, are we talking about estate planning? Are we talking about creating, private foundation? And then there are a series of follow-up meetings where I would go off and maybe find out some things or present some options, maybe talk to the wealth advisor and the financial manager and say, okay, here's some options for you. It may also then involve, I could go do a little bit of research and say, here are some nonprofits that might be worth your consideration. Are these the kind of groups that you might be interested in? If you like those, let's talk about what it might be like to reach out to those groups or I could go find out more information. So it is kind of a series of ongoing, and then it's really just a routine check-in, with my client. But it is essentially there is a little bit of a structure at first, but then it really does depend on the family and their needs and their particular issues that they're trying to solve. So,
Yeah, every family is so different.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
then, and speaking to that, I think I know the answer to this, but for folks who may be watching, whether you're working directly with a family or you're working with a wealth advisor, is it a flat fee that you work with, or hourly? How do you manage that?
Um, again, really, it depends on both. My clients, I can do either. And it really depends on, some people love the idea of knowing really specifically, okay, this is what I'm going to invest in my consulting assistance, and we can set a particular flat fee. And so, I mean, I can develop one that basically includes what we just talked about,
Sure.
introductory meeting and a couple of follow-up meetings and some research on my part, and say, okay, here's an introductory package. I also then can say, I do have an hourly rate. And it also depends on, for example, if they're contracting with me specifically. And in some cases, I could also envision, not to put you on the spot, but also can envision where a wealth management company or a financial management firm retains someone in my position to provide service to a number of their clients. So
Sure.
again, that just becomes part of a value add service, for the financial or wealth management company. So it can go, both ways depending on the situation. So.
Well, the important thing is that you're flexible, and that's
Yes.
scalable,
And,
right?
and as an independent consultant, that really, I very, very, there's no giant office structure, HR department, whatever behind me. So yeah, I'm very flexible from that standpoint. Absolutely.
Can you sort of one, two, three best practices that you see? I have it written as in philanthropy, but I'd like to be more specific. Best practices from your vantage point as a 2164 consultant, when you are matching a family with a nonprofit, what do
Mm.
you see as the best practices for doing that?
There are a few things that really are emerging as kind of best practices in philanthropy, and they really all do go to the relationship building. I think, from a broad perspective, there's a lot of focus now on what is known as trust-based philanthropy, and there is an actual whole movement. There's an even organization called the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project, and they've got great resources for donors and funders who want to sort of center this. And it really is about changing the relationship between donors and their nonprofits. It's about encouraging unrestricted giving, multi-year giving, so that when you do give to nonprofits, you're not putting so many strings attached to that it actually hampers the nonprofit from doing its own work and doing it well. One of the things that really is becoming an important thing is the whole concept of shifting what we call the power dynamic. As you know, when donors come in, I think it's really important for donors of almost any level, especially large funders. They need to understand the power dynamic that exists when they come to a nonprofit's going to do anything they say, or it is an odd relationship when you want it to be a really, trust-based and back and forth relationship. Nonprofits can be really afraid to say things that might be not working well and things like that. So shifting that power to really increase the agency of the nonprofits to talk about what's really needed, to talk about what really are the issues that need to be addressed in that particular community. Because donors are certainly smart people. They obviously are smart, successful business people, but they don't necessarily have all the answers, and they definitely don't know everything that's needed in a community. And it's really important for them to stop and ask and listen to that community, either through a nonprofit or to, there are a lot of funders who are now like convening community listening sessions as a whole group called the Fund for Shared Insight that has an entire set of practices and action items or ways you can do listening in the community. So it's becoming a new way, and that's becoming, I think, a really best practice. Lastly, from a practical standpoint, the rise in the donor advised fund and the use of the DAF or the donor advised fund as a mechanism for giving as an alternative to a private foundation, for example, is also really one of the big things that are now coming up, in all kinds of organizations like community foundations have their own DAFs. It's not just Fidelity anymore. So that is certainly something, I may or may not label it a best practice. It is an active practice, and there are, pros and cons with that, just like any other. But it certainly is becoming a lot more used nowadays than just we're going to start a family foundation. So.
Right. And that makes sense. And we have a lot of conversations internally about that. My business partner, Doug Tees, has that cap designation. So he's a
Okay, sure, yeah,
trusted
yeah.
advisor in philanthropy, and he leads that area for our firm. And many of our clients have enjoyed the benefits of donor advised funds, which has been really convenient. They've also enjoyed the benefit of working with community foundations, the
Mhm.
Arlington Community Foundation, Northern
Yep.
Virginia Community Foundation. And from your perspective, as someone who's, again, been on both sides,
Mhm.
what do you see as the future of philanthropy delivery? And what I mean to say is people identifying organizations to donate to, and what do you think of the use of artificial
Mhm.
intelligence in that space? Are
Oh.
they encouraging more people like you to be 2164s or less? Your thoughts?
You know, I have seen AI really more affect the nonprofits and fundraisers more than anything else. I mean, a lot of fundraisers are using AI to write solicitation letters, to write proposals, to write letters that are in the voice of the donor, which enables them to communicate in a much more authentic way back to the donor. I'm definitely seeing that more necessarily than seeing AI, for example, affect what I would do, with, I guess, the exception of there's so much research available now, and as technology, back when I got started, you were lucky if you could do some searches or you could go to the foundation center to look up a funder. There's so much information that you can look up, and I guess frankly, you probably could go to Chat GPT and say, tell me about some really good nonprofits that are working in my community, and they probably could come up with some ideas. There are, though, an increasing number of philanthropy support organizations, PSOs, what we call them,
Okay.
and they are like allied funders. So there's like funders together to fight homelessness, or there's funders, grant makers in health, and even locally here in Washington, D.C., there is a group called Spur Local, which used to be called the Catalog for Philanthropy, and it is basically a catalog of vetted, well-run, high-impact nonprofits serving this region, and it's designed as a tool for donors to look and say, okay, I want to find a really good organization supporting youth in Northern Virginia. Well, they've got lists of them and they've been through a review process. I review applications for Spur Local. And so there are groups like that that you find kind of popping up all over the country. Arlington Community Foundation has a list that it produces towards the end of the year of Arlington nonprofits and the kind of needs that they have. So there are certainly a lot more resources that sort of technology and increased communication are enabling donors. It can be overwhelming. Again, I think then it becomes a that's then the role for us as advisors is to go in and say, all right, well, you read all these things and now you're looking at 10 different organizations. How do
How
you
do
only
you
want to
choose?
support two, or you want to maybe, and that's also a thing, do I give, $10 to 10 organizations? Do I give $100 to one? Which is also
Yeah.
I'm having that conversation with my family foundation client. But yeah, it is a thing to do. But that is where an advisor or a consultant can come in and say, all right, well, let's actually look at this and let's maybe figure out together what makes sense for you, given all these great choices, because all the nonprofits are doing amazing work. And it's really on the nonprofits, and I tell them this all the time, is to distinguish themselves, you know, not to say we are better than or they're worse than we are. It's just, how is my nonprofit different than that nonprofit, which is doing something similar, but we all have a different approach. And that makes donors do a little bit more informed choices. When we know, okay, this organization, their particular focus is this versus that, then I can make a choice as a donor. And that's what I would help my donor clients to be able to do.
Well, thank you. Step one, maybe
Sure.
looking at Spur Local if you're in the DC
Yes, and
area.
if you're here in the Washington D.C. area, I highly recommend it. And they're super active. Been around for 20 some years now, and I mean, there's a lot of resources that Spur Local has for groups here in the Washington D.C. area. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, as we wrap up here, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing so much of this content that is not easily accessible or readily accessible to so many people, especially when they're first generation wealth and they're
Mhm.
just coming into these monies and they want to do something, but they don't know who to ask. I think
Mhm.
having someone like you in the list of partners is really helpful. Before we go, is there one, first step that you would say to anyone who is an upcoming philanthropist, though most of them shy away from that word and that title, but what's the first thing that they could do to give themselves a little bit of runway on learning about philanthropy and how to be a good philanthropist and how to make good decisions?
I certainly to think that everyone can do it. Everyone can give. I mean, everyone has the capacity to give, whether it be a small amount or a large amount. And every family can look into this, even if they're still just filling out their Schedule A with charitable contributions. They haven't even gone the route of having to start a donor advised fund. You can still give thoughtfully. You can still think about what's important to me and are the gifts that I'm giving making a difference, and how do I know that they're making a difference, and if and how can I go find out by asking the nonprofit or by doing some research through a group like Spur Local. But it really is, it just takes that first step of what's important to me, and I can do what I can do. I can lend my time, I can give a few dollars, I can encourage people to learn more about a particular cause. All of that helps, and everyone then becomes a philanthropist just by doing those small steps.
Everyone becomes a philanthropist
Yeah.
just by doing those small steps. Excellent. Marshall H. Ginn, founder of Capital Philanthropy right here in the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you so much for being here today. Enjoy the weather and the weekend. And with that, I yield the balance of everyone's time.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Really appreciate the opportunity.